Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, second part there already for the 6th of September 2024, and that's because I've done a quick clearing the backlog of Andrew Perpetua's loss list. Just another public thanks to Andrew and his team and Tochny and everyone associated with open source intelligence, but particularly those guys. Andrew works his absolute socks off, so massive respect to Andrew. I don't say that enough. Right, okay, I am probably going to do a live stream later because I have a feeling I've just got a lot of content, and sometimes that's the quickest way to get it out there without burdening you too much with too many videos, because I want to do a US election update as well today to clear that backlog. And there's quite a lot going on with regard to Ramstein meeting, and Zelensky is there and all the contact group of 50 allies are meeting. So there's probably going to be some emerging news with regard to military aid coming out today. So I think I'll do a live probably around sort of midday UK time. And if you guys can join in and we'll have a chat, that'd be cool. Anyway, we'll go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. And you can find those caveats in the description to the video below. 1,170 personnel losses, a little bit of a downtick from previous days, but still massive loss for the Russians. Kursk is going to be hurting them. Got a bit of news on that from Zelensky, and obviously all the other activity taking place on front lines. We've seen 7 tanks, or at least the general staff say 7 tanks have been lost on the day before, which is a tad below the daily average, but it's still fairly significant. 9 troop carrying AFVs, which is definitely below the daily average. And given that we've seen a number of days of quite a few bits of kit taken out on the front lines, and that's interesting that there's only 9 troop carrying AFVs. I think we're seeing again an uptick in videos of repelled attacks and Russian equipment getting taken out. So I think that that's a reflection of some offensive units being brought to places like Pokrovsk to do some defensive work. There is possibly an element of maybe units come down from Kursk that's operating there. I think the Azov Brigade have gone into Turetsk and New York and have actually taken some ground back in New York. So there's activity taking place and a kind of active defense where they're not just conceding territory anymore, and they are attriting quite a bit of Russian equipment. And we are seeing that, as I say, on the visuals. But it's interesting that not too many AFVs have been seen on this list from yesterday. Okay, 20 artillery systems above the daily average by a snip, 1 multiple launch rocket system, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. That's good news. We haven't seen either on those 2 categories for a few days. Now, then we see 72 vehicles and fuel tanks, so a really big uptick there, back to a very significant number. So it could be that some of these AFVs are being replaced by other vehicles that fall into that category, and so therefore some of the attacking that might have taken place yesterday could have been done with other vehicles, or it just there's a lot of buggies. I've seen another motorcycle graveyards and some imagery of that. Anyway, 72 is a very high number. 13 pieces of special equipment, also pretty high there. So a bit of a mixed bag of numbers, but generally pretty good for the Ukrainians. Now, of course, the question is always, well, what are the Ukrainians losing themselves? I've shown you already today 2 loss lists from the previous 2 days to this one. This is the September 4th. We're on the 6th now. So Andrew is operating to a bit of a backlog. Here we can see that the Ukrainians have got back to at least 1.5 to a ratio of 1.5 to 1 Russian to Ukrainian losses, which is going in the right direction. And the good news here is the combat asset losses is about 2.5, 3 to 1 Russia to Ukrainian losses. So that's really good news for the Ukrainians there. But we've had it's been on some days parity, on some days slightly better for the Ukrainians, but it's certainly not what it was months back. And that is, as I keep mentioning, because Kursk has been on the cards and the Ukrainians are on the offensive, which means they're going to lose offensive vehicles. Okay, and I don't mean vehicles that are going to be swearing at you, of course. Right, recovery vehicle lost here for the Ukrainians, a Berger Panzer II, German provided one there. We have a couple of boats destroyed, artillery piece, just a generic howitzer, unknown howitzer, damage there, a couple of tanks taken out, abandoned actually. disabled by mines, abandoned and hit by an FPV drone, so almost certainly lost. A couple of infantry fighting vehicles destroyed, by those are BMP-1, so fairly old equipment lost in those two categories, which is better. APCs, we have 7 APCs there, 4 of them abandoned and destroyed, and those are a couple of Senators, a Striker and a BTR. So a large proportion of these vehicles, when you go down, particularly the APCs and MRAPs, seem to be Western now. They cycle through most of the older Soviet era APCs and whatnot. Obviously, there's a BTR there, but generally speaking, the rest of these are Senator, Striker, Senator, Senator, Striker, Humvee, Senator. Okay, so very much Western provided, some Canadian equipment there, some American Strikers and Humvees. Okay, MRAPs, 100% abandoned or destroyed, 3 of them, 2 Max Pros and a 1 Ukrainian Kozak 7. And then it's on to civilian vehicles and whatnot, pickup trucks, etc., etc. Quite a good for the Russians sort of ratio of abandoned and destroyed to damaged. So that's a bit of a challenge for the Ukrainians. Then when we come up to the Russian equipment, we see at the top here, I don't know why that's there, civilian motorcycle, but I guess, yeah, it can go either, whatever. We have, and that looks like... interesting. So the Ukrainians aren't really aiming for civilian vehicles with civilians on them, because it's not in their best interest either from a military point of view. They're not attriting the military equipment that is fighting in the war, but also from a PR point of view. You start purposefully targeting civilians in a way that the Russians do, and you're going to lose support from international allies. So I wonder what the situation is here. I'm assuming it was mistakenly done rather than purposefully done, a civilian motorcycle damaged by a drone drop bomb. Anyway, moving on, air defense system, an OSA AKM. That's a slightly older air defense system there, but still useful for the Ukrainians to take that out. That's destroyed. Good news. Recovery vehicle destroyed, and then quite a few howitzers, mainly damaged, as they often are, but it's difficult to know whether the Russians are able to fix up the damaged howitzers. Often if it's the barrel that's damaged, then that means a replacement barrel, which is hard to come by, and you effectively might as well get a new howitzer from deep storage. Going on to tanks, about 50% of these are destroyed and abandoned, tad over, so I think there's 11 there, 6 of them destroyed and abandoned. Tank with mine rollers, tracked guard and shed, but most of these are tanks that are of unknown variant, because I presume they are either so badly destroyed or the resolution is not good enough, or whatever. Then we have quite a few infantry fighting vehicles here, most of them abandoned and destroyed. BMP 2s and 3s, BTR 82s, so on and so forth. APCs, a few of those, all of them destroyed and abandoned, and then quite a lot of civilian vehicles, only a couple of trucks there. So nothing too untoward apart from an air defense system, so that's good news for Ukrainians. Generally, the Russians losing more equipment there. Combat asset losses are higher for the Russians and for the Ukrainians, so good news there. Okay, let's go on and look at some supporting evidence. Now, I have to say that most of this skews to pro-Ukrainian stuff in this section. Just some of the videos that are coming out, just there seems to be more of them at the moment. But remember, I might have my biases and selection biases, so be aware of that. Russian losses, 6,000 soldiers have been killed and wounded during the month of August in Kursk region, according to Zelensky. So 1,300 square kilometers of Kursk territory are now under control of the Ukrainians. More than 100 settlements he's added, which is pretty much where we need. There's marginal gains there. There's a few gains just north of Sudzha over the last 24 hours, but 6,000 soldiers lost killed and wounded in that one area alone for the Russians shows how problematic it is for them. The Russian 76th Division, 104th Regiment released a very hilarious video. It says PS01 here. Note the presence of African and Asian mercenaries. They are sent to plug the holes in Kursk defence, but all of them are not really fit for purpose. Some of them totter and need sticks to move around. Others are shell-shocked and do not manage to utter any words, etc. glorious army of Russia. So this idea, you got another video complaining. You've got people just saying they're not fit for purpose, and these are defending Kursk. And so there's a lot of there is this prevailing idea that the Russians are not drawing from their sort of best troops doing the most successful operations in the Pokrovsk region, but as a result, they're having to kind of get anyone from anywhere. And this appears to be a selection of, in this case, and this anecdotal, of course, but a selection of poorly prepared soldiers of possibly older, more infirm, or mercenaries from left, right, and centre, and it could be an indication that the Russians are desperate to try and defend Kursk. Okay, then when we have, I presume this is Kursk, Ukrainian defenders sharing a story of how a Russian granny surrendered 20 Russian soldiers to Ukrainian captivity. So let's pop into this guy. It's only 40 seconds. We'll listen to what I'll say what he says. He says, one granny turned in 20 Russians. Really? He's asked, how did she do it? And he says, she just came up to our guys and said, there are 20 boys who want to surrender, but they have weapons. So she wasn't surrendering them against their will. They wanted to surrender. She warned them, told them where. Where? Were they in a house? Yes, there are a lot of them there now, hiding in fields and forests. They are so scared. It's funny, he says. And he's laughing. He's laughing. These guys are, obviously not up for it. Very funny. The truck, it's not our truck. We took it from the other side. So looking at that truck that's just gone past. So just a little insight. Really, yeah, we took a lot of equipment. So an insight, completely anecdotal, of course, but from a Ukrainian soldier up in Kursk, taken some equipment off the Russians, and also has seen a case where a granny is surrendering 20 Russian soldiers. Now, another interesting nugget to throw into here on the personnel front, Russian Ministry of Attack is seriously calling on Russian pensioners to go to the SMO. They tell of a 62-year-old man who was not allowed in, but he insisted on coming, was later wounded, and now wants to go back to assaults. Join us. Age is no obstacle, says the ministry. So the idea here is that they are amplifying this story of a pensioner or a 62-year-old, not necessarily a pensioner, a 62-year-old who was too old to fight but wanted to fight anyway, got wounded, and then really wants to go back. So this is kind of what you guys should be wanting to do. And age is no barrier, which is to say they desperately need people, and so therefore please go and sign up. We need you, and it doesn't matter if you're really old and feel you're too old for this. Now, talking about more personal issues, Anton Korishchenko reports on this video where a guy says there were 15 of us, I'm the only one left alive. A Russian Yakut soldier complains his group was destroyed and they're not provided with help or water. My arm was hit, I've got bones sticking out, says this guy. He's the only one left of his 15. So things are desperate for these Russian troops, but as we say so often, they have the ability to sink these losses, the Russians. They just have huge numbers of people. I think it is rather desperate now, so actually I don't think they have huge numbers of people, but they've got just about enough to keep the pressure on in places like Pokrovsk. Although it has stabilized, the Ukrainians have brought in units to Pokrovsk, and actually the Russians don't seem to be making the huge gains that they previously were. In fact, General Sursky has said that they've not made any single meter of gain in the last 6 days, the Russians. So somewhere in the Luhansk front, a location with 4 Russian T-80 OBR 2022, so the recent iteration of the T-80 and 1 MAZ fuel truck was found. All equipment was destroyed. Video filmed by the Russian ministry on the 3rd of September. So here we have, troop concentration, 4 tanks and a fuel truck hit and totally destroyed. All of the vehicles were destroyed. Probably the fuel truck went up and took everything with it, but interesting loss of equipment there in the Luhansk area. And then we have so what's this? The Ukrainians military stole a tank again. So this is I don't know if you remember, there was an APC that was hit under a bridge with people around it, and it was hit, and the APC was done for. It's the same bridge as far as I can work out. So there was an underground passage on the eastern edge of the town of Seladova. So that's just southwest of the Pokrovsk salient. Located, as it says, south of Pokrovsk, that is quickly becoming a hotbed of brutal fighting in the city. On Wednesday, a pair of Russian armoured vehicles landed their infantry there and immediately came under fire from a Ukrainian T-64 and was firing at fairly close range. A day later, so that's what I was talking about previously, I think, a day later, the crew of the same Ukrainian tank, or maybe even the same tank, committed a daring robbery at the same crossing, where they go and steal basically a Russian vehicle. Let's see if we can catch that. So you have them here getting that vehicle, and so I don't know if that's, so there appears to be the Russian vehicle that then goes underneath the bridge, and the Ukrainians eventually, I presume, kind of disable it or something and take control of that vehicle. So when we're starting to see, like I said previously, more and more pieces of video evidence of equipment being degraded, destroyed in, for example, the Pokrovsk region, also down in Vuhledar, you're thinking the Ukrainians are putting up a bit more of a defense than they previously were. So talking about Vuhledar, Russians tried to storm there and they did take heavy losses. We have a motorcycle graveyard again, so it's evidence that the Russians are using motorcycles to attack. Suboptimal. They're also losing a lot of equipment in Vuhledar, but they are also making the gains down there, and this is what the Russians do. They throw personnel and equipment at problems, and they still take the ground eventually. The question is, how long can they keep doing that for? And that's the question I've been asking for a couple of years now. So this is an important video because it shows that the Ukrainians are really working hard on taking out these surveillance drones. These were the drones that have been the bane of the Ukrainians for the entire year. It started off with the Orlan 10s and Orlan 30s. Now they use a range of them. In fact, there are only 5 out of these 49 Russian medium range or long range reconnaissance drones that were Orlans. We've got one Lancer in here, 7 Supercams, and 36 Zala. So these are all, apart from the Lancer, all reconnaissance drones being taken out by FPV drones that are hunting them down. Look how high up these are in the sky, and the FPV drones are working absolutely fine, being able to take these drones out. So really significant that 49 of these drones have been taken out of the sky. The Ukrainians having a much greater success rate of doing that, and of course each one of these drones that's taken out is unable to spot for targets for the Russians. So it's super good news to see that. Now the bad news for the Ukrainians here, based on at least 3 obituaries on crew members of the Ukrainian Navy, the U-540 Shigrin training ship, we believe on August the 29th was sunk as a result of a missile strike. Ship was destroyed in the Berlachia Balka area in the Odessa region. The information needs to be confirmed, but it could well be the case that this ship has been sunk in the Odessa area. So obituaries of Russian sailors indicate that could well be the case. Okay. Oh, sorry, not Russian sailors. Did I say Russian? I meant Ukrainian. A Russian drone has deliberately hit a fire truck in Dnipro. Another example of what they sort of aim for, how they go about their work, the Russians. Prior to that, Russia attacked the city's civilian infrastructure. Then Russians waited until rescuers arrived to conduct a second strike. This is not the first time Russia has deliberately attacked Ukrainian rescuers and their equipment. Not by a long shot. They do that quite routinely, and there's more evidence of that happening. Now, a factory in the Tula region is reportedly on fire. The factory was said to produce components for automobiles, machinery, personal protective equipment, and more. Indeed, it was massive, this fire, in the end. So that's a Plastic Geosintetica plastics factory in Tula. Reportedly, the fire spread to over 1,000 square meters. A really big fire there. I would presume that is not coincidental, that factory was doing work for the war project, and you're looking at some kind of sabotage there. Right, moving on to distant strikes. Last night there were again another large wave. So there are very few days at the moment when there are not many drones at all. Like, everything seems to be above 30 at the moment in terms of drone strikes on Ukraine, or attempted drone strikes. There are often 100% of these taken out either by interception or electronic warfare, or the drones going for a wander. But yeah, this, as I said, over the last few days, it does show that the Russians are well able to produce and procure enough of these drones to keep consecutive, consistent drone waves happening. There were 44 apparently last night that were sent, 27 were intercepted, and 8 fell due to electronic warfare measures. So that gives you 35. And actually, this is one of the lowest interception and electronic warfare rates that we've seen for some time. So 35 out of 44 gives you 9, which is about a fifth. So about a fifth of those did not, about a fifth of them were able, one presumes, to find their targets. And that could be serious. That those targets could be a Patriot air defense system, or it could be a factory, or whatever it is. We don't know. The Ukrainians do a pretty good job of keeping that quiet. Now, Tim White reports that Pavlohrad has been hit with a ballistic missile. That's not mentioned previously. So that's appears to have been this morning. Initial reports, at least 5 people have been injured. Actually, in latest reports, 1 has died in that. So fairly quiet night, all other things considered, but there are areas that have had a lot of attention. Kharkiv region being attacked today. Aerial bombs hit a village of Izyumske. And yeah, there are, in fact, aerial bombs are a real problem for Ukraine still. It's a problem that hasn't been solved, and in fact it's getting worse again, is my speculation, my summary from seeing a lot of claims of guided glide bombs causing all sorts of damage all over the shop. Firefighters injured near the front line, another strike on fire equipment. More injuries in Kharkiv. What do we have? Lviv region. Right, so in Lviv, we have warehouses in flames after Russian drone attack. Fragments from falling drone debris causing fires at warehouses there. So possibly not the intended target, no casualties, but what goes up must come down, and that can often lead to big problems. Here, authorities say many vehicles were destroyed when drone debris fell on a village of Moravana. The fire in the industrial zone of the town was quite quickly extinguished with no casualties reported, but still problems there. And then again, as mentioned, Kharkiv continues to suffer as Russia's planes, protected from NATO missiles, bomb the region. 2 people were injured in Syrikuni, so another village just northeast of the city. At least 20 houses were damaged by an aerial bomb. Another aerial bomb hit the village of Izyumske, as mentioned before as well. So lots of damage being done there. Now, the Russians also attacked on the morning of the 5th, so that's not last night but the night before, Sumy Airport. Firms data showing that. I don't know if that's a military airfield, but they did have some success of striking there. It could be some issue for the Ukrainians. I mean, it's fairly close to the border with the Russians, so I doubt you're going to see a lot of military air traffic going from there, but that's just my supposition. We also have seen Kherson targeted, an attack on a hospital there. 2 workers at the medical facility were found wounded by flying glass when walls and windows were blown out. Every strike on Kherson, because there's no military really in Kherson city, every strike there is, in my opinion, a war crime, and the Russians just terrorizing the civilians who live in or trying to cling on to normal life in Kherson. It's so sad. And video of FAB 3000, so this is a 3,000 kilogram bomb, huge guided glide bomb. Supposedly that is footage of an FAB 3000 strike in a Kursk Oblast. So this is Russia hitting Russia. I mean, one of the reasons why I say Kursk was a good place, it was a right place to attack. You wouldn't want to attack anywhere on the front line because you would attrit your own personnel. and material, and you get bogged down in minefields and fortifications. And if you're going to do any fighting there, then that damage gets done to Ukraine. Whereas you take the fight into Kursk, and Russia are now bombing their own towns and cities, or towns and villages in Kursk. And that's issues that they will have to sort out going forward, rather than Ukraine having to sort out the damage done to its own country. Now, talking about sorting out damage, insurers in Russia have massively increased their rates for terrorism and sabotage coverage. Rate hikes are 700% on warehouses, 7,000% on oil refineries, and 12,000% on industrial facilities. Ukrainian drone attacks are having knock-on effects. I wonder what the situation is for the Ukrainians as well. And this is coming from the Moscow Times. Drone strike insurance prices have risen sharply in Russia. And that makes everything much more expensive. You then have inflationary pressures on the Russian economy, so on and so forth. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. And sadly, we start with, I'm not going to show you the video, but it's desperately sad. Again, it's not the first time that we've seen these horrific videos. My goodness, there appear to be countless videos of Russians executing Ukrainians. This is a field execution of a Ukrainian prisoner of war. So he's just sitting there. It blurs out, but they kill him. They shoot him. And that is a war crime. And there you go. That is Russia committing yet again another war crime. If you have any doubt as to who the bad guys are in this, then you need to get your head checked. Okay, Tatarugami says the reality is that no single solution will solve the problem of Russian KABs, CARB, these glided guide bombs. There's such an issue, and they continue to be an issue. Not Patriots, F-16s or ATACMS alone, even with permission to strike. Only frequent and steady build-up of these systems combined with experience and permissions to strike will make a real difference. Yep, they need to bring everything to bear at those airfields, push those Russian planes further back or destroy them outright, and then they won't be able to fly and release these bombs. But nothing is happening primarily because of those restrictions. It's incredibly frustrating. Right, General Syrsky, the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, has been interviewed on CNN. A couple of quotes from him to Christiane Amanpour, who's doing good work at the moment in Kiev. She's in position in Ukraine, so it's good to see her interviewing the movers and shakers here. Syrsky says it reduced the threat of an enemy offensive, so this is the attack into Kursk. We prevented them from acting. We moved the fight into the enemy's territory so that the enemy could feel what we feel every day. Over the last 6 days, the enemy hasn't advanced a single meter in a Pokrovsk direction. In other words, our strategy is working, he explained. The enemy does not have an advantage in aviation, in missiles, in artillery, in the amount of ammunition they use, of course, in personnel, tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles. Does have a big difference there. So the Ukrainians are at a disadvantage in the amount of kit, basically, that they can bring to bear in its war. Russia still has those advantages. So I was going to play you actually hit some of it, although it's not subtitled, it is dubbed over, but you can go and watch it. It's well worth watching. There's a 10 and a half minute CNN video there, but I'll just give you the key points as according to Flash News. So for the last 6 days, said Syrsky, in the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy has not advanced a single meter, and this weakening, that's the editor saying that, is undoubtedly felt in other regions. Russia has a material advantage, in particular in aviation, missiles, tanks, artillery, ammunition, as well as personnel. Therefore, Ukraine is forced to be smarter and more efficient. That's the same as it's been throughout the course of the war. Russia has transferred tens of thousands of troops to the Kursk region, including some of its best airborne assault units. Interesting. New recruits undergo shorter training than they would like, but the dynamics at the front require the transfer of new forces as soon as possible. I don't know if he's talking about Ukrainians there. Delays in the US military aid caused serious setbacks on the battlefield and led to a drop in morale. So there you go. Now, I'm going to give you some good news. There's been some fairly challenging news for the Ukrainians over the last month or so in terms of what's gone on in Pokrovsk and on the eastern front line. And that still is largely an issue, particularly going down to Vuhledar at the bottom of the Donetsk area. But there is some good news coming out. So north of Kharkiv, in the Hlyerbekay area, just south of there, the Ukrainians have taken back some land. pushing the Russians back 1 to 2 kilometers there, according to Deep State Map. Good news in the New York area. So near Toretsk, you got Toretsk up here, New York here, and then Pokrovsk down further to the southwest. Some good news, says Defmon, according to Deep State Map again. There are improvements in the New York area. What's happened in the New York area? Well, the Azov Brigade are apparently fighting in Toretsk in New York, and there's footage of them doing their stuff. And indeed, Ukraine's Azov say it's relieved surrounded troops in New York and regained ground. The 12th Special Forces Azov Brigade helped to avert a catastrophic situation in New York and Donetsk, unblocking surrounded Ukrainian soldiers and regaining part of the settlement, the brigade said. So coming to the rescue of a dire situation and stabilising it and taking back some land, some ground, that's good. What you don't want to do is have someone like the Azov Brigade then being the general squaddies on the ground. This is what's happened a lot with the Russians, is that they end up using their elite troops as your bog standard troops, and then they get diluted and they become not your elite troops, and it's not the best way to use them. And then when we also have some improvement in Seladove, which is that town just south of Novohrodivka on this southwestern part of this salient in towards Pokrovsk. So Pokrovsk is just up here. Now, the situation there, according to Syriac maps, is during the last 48 hours, the Ukrainian army launched a counterattack and managed to recapture most of the town of Seladove and parts of Mikhailivka. So again, some good news perhaps there on the Pokrovsk front. Then Tendar says Ukrainian forces made more confirmed gains in the Russian Kursk region. Several villages north of Malaya Lochnia have fallen to the Ukrainian advance. Some of them are rather new and others are likely longer under Ukrainian control. According to my map, says Tendar, Ukrainian forces control 1,150 square kilometers. This is more than all the Russian gains in Ukraine in the whole year. Ukrainian army sources say they hold 1,300 square kilometers, so more than Tendar has logged. So there's some good bits of news for the Ukrainians at a number of places along the front line. In Kursk, another video has appeared showing Russian soldiers robbing a children's clothes store in Koronevo. They also stole money from the store's till. According to surveillance footage, this happened on August the 12th. Locals from Koronevo reported the Russian soldiers have robbed all or nearly all the businesses there. So Koronevo is pretty... it's been hammered, basically. It's the epicenter of a lot of the fighting on the Kursk front. But the Russian soldiers, in trying to defend their homeland, their motherland, have looted it, have largely looted these commercial enterprises, and you've had even locals doing the same. So rather than pulling together, it's all gone to chaos and every man for themselves. Ukraine says it successfully hit a number of Russia's structures in a cyber attack. This must be seen in the context that the GUR have warned about, the Ukrainians and I think even the CIA have warned about a GRU, which is a Russian sort of special Russian intelligence, that they have a cyber unit that I think the Americans have put a $10 million reward for information leading to them being caught. So this goes both ways. But Ukraine has just said it successfully hit a number of Russia's structures in a cyber attack. Among the institutions targeted were Lukoil. Sources say the Bank of Russia and the country's traffic police were also attacked. 18 servers were destroyed without possibility of recovery. Ouch. That's good news there for the Ukrainians. Anyway, that's enough from my I'd say second video of the day. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. It's really important, so I'm told. I'd love to get to 1 million subscribers from 46,000. Yeah, that's never going to happen. Anyway, a couple more be nice. Take care, guys. Speak soon.